Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Matthew Slater, and I'm very fortunate to be here with my esteemed colleagues. And let me introduce them briefly, going from closest to me to further away. This is Mr. Vern Liebl, Mr. Mike Purcell, Mr. Will Caban, and Mr. John Powell. So we're here today. We all work together in support of the Marine Corps LREC capability. And it's a training and education institution. LREC stands for Language, Regional Expertise, and Culture. In DoD speak, this basically means that we teach language and social science in support of military operations. Now, our topic today is focused on this idea or this notion that the military is currently between the horns of a dilemma in the modern era. And what we mean by this is that we want the military to be sensitive and to understand foreign cultures, but at the same time we expect them to represent our national, philosophical, political, and moral ideals. This can cause some problems. In the past, the military had time and distance to sort of navigate this dilemma. But today we live in the era of the 24-hour news cycle. What does this mean? We have a proliferation of technology, of media on the front lines. So they're piping this information back in real time, and this affects at the tactical and operational level how our military executes its mission. What we're going to do for this panel is I'm going to give each of the participants 11 minutes, and in this time frame they're going to give a brief introduction, a little more detail about what they do at our organization. Then they're going to do an LREC vignette. They're going to talk about their own personal experiences when they've deployed, they've interacted with foreign cultures, and how this dilemma that we described transpired and impacted the way they think. Let's begin with Mr. Vern Liebl.
Good afternoon. My name is Vern Liebl. I'm a retired major from the United States Marine Corps. I was an intelligence officer. I served for 24 years. I have 4 combat tours. I have been to the rock pile, Afghanistan. I've been to the sandbox, Iraq, and I have been to the Horn of Africa, Djibouti, Yemen, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, I am currently the Middle East desk officer for the Center for Advanced Operational Cultural Learning down at Quantico. Okay, the first thing when Matt was talking about some of the real-time problems that the military faces. First thing I'm going to talk about is an experience that happened to me in Afghanistan. We had secured a location in Said Kharama district down in Paktika province, and the guy that was our target had run away. We had his family. We evacuated the family because we were going to blow the house because there were about 2,000 pounds of ordnance in the basement of the house. Okay, it was bad guy stuff. So we took the family, we moved them to a safe distance, we thought about 75 yards away, behind a big mud brick wall. They should be safe. What we didn't know was there were 3 sub-basements, and when we actually lit this thing off, it was over 20,000 pounds of ordnance. Okay, so that was a big, big boom. The wall fell over and killed the entire family. Completely unexpected. We didn't, I mean, you know, we suffered casualties as well. Okay, within hours, the New York Times representative came down to that site, stood on top of a collapsed wall, and said, "Where are these people that you military people killed?" Guess what collapsed wall she was standing on? She had no intention of giving a correct synopsis of what actually happened. Okay, these are some of the real-time issues that we face. Okay, now some of the experiences that I've enjoyed. The first one I'm going to talk about occurred in Djibouti. I was working with some Germans in Djibouti in the Horn of Africa, and we were talking about how we all got to Africa, and they said, well, we arrived here on board a ship. And when they were on the ship, the Djiboutians were drawn up, there were crowds waiting for them, and as the Germans marched off the ship, they were all received the Nazi salute. And the Djiboutians were very happy, and the Germans were like, And so they managed to take somebody aside and says, why did you do that? And he says, well, the French said that you love that. Okay, that was in 2004. Okay, so when we're talking about allies and coalitions, we're talking about all kinds of things, and you have to take a lot of things into account. The second one, I was in Yemen. I was at Damar, the university city, and I was talking with an Iraqi doctor who was the learned man in the region. So he had his a bunch of guys with him, all Yemeni tribesmen. They're all heavily armed. I was the only Marine there. I was with a bunch of Army Special Forces civil affairs guys. Anyhow, this Iraqi doctor and I were talking. We're relaxed, and then he says, "You're married, right?" And I said, "Yes, I am, just like you." And I said, "You have children?" I said, "I have 3 sons." And he said, "Ah, boys, you're a man." I'm like, "Yeah, thank you, I know that." And then he said, "So, are you going to raise them as Muslims?" And I says, "No, even though their mother is a Muslim, because I'm married to a Muslim." And he's like, "You're what?" And I was like, "Yes, she's Muslim." He says, "So you're not going to raise them as Muslims?" And his voice is getting a lot louder. He's starting to get angry. And I said, "No, I'm not." And he just started to call me all kinds of, nasty names. We write in cursive. Sometimes we speak in cursive. And so it reached a point where he's just like, "I'm going to go to hell. I'm going to roast forever because I'm just not raising the kids right." And I sat there and I said, "Just stop right there. I'm going to tell you what, you can't talk to me like that." And he says, "You can't talk to me like that. I know your rules of engagement." Oh, they all know our rules. First lesson you guys have to learn, okay? So anyhow, I said, well, one thing is on my sons, we have this thing in America called freedom of choice. And then I said, the next thing is, when I'm in hell roasting for eternity, I'm going to be very happy because I'll be talking to you the entire time. Okay? And so at this point, everybody's got their hands on their weapons. It's about ready to be an open firefight. And this guy's face is all, ugh. And then he said, "Yeah, okay." And that was it. Because they expect you to defend yourself. They expect you to defend your faith. They don't expect you to sit there and say nothing, because in a region in which religion is everything, and if you don't have one and you don't talk about it, guess what you are? You're an atheist. Therefore, you're as the worst thing that you can be. So have a faith and defend it. That's all they're asking. That way they can put you in their box. It's a very interesting lesson. The next one, I was in Qatar. I was working in a consolidated media processing center. We got a whole bunch of documents and stuff from Iraq, and we were processing and translating them. Some of them were impregnated with mustard gas. It was a real fun time. And anyhow, I had 2 companies from the U.S. Army Reserves working with me, and I'd hired 140 local Muslims from the entire region. And I was walking through the break area one day, and I heard these Muslims talking to the soldiers. Oh, by the way, the soldiers were all Mormons from Utah. And so they're going down. "Okay, you can have multiple wives." This is the Arabs talking to the Muslims. And the Mormons are like, "Yeah." "And you've got your own prophet." "Yeah." "Okay, you've got a book that was found just like we." "Yeah." And I'm like, "Oh my God, there's going to be Mormon suicide bombers coming out of Salt Lake City, and this is my fault." Okay. But they all got along, but it's just, they're comparing religions all the time. And it was really kind of disconcerting when they have more things in agreement than in difference. Okay, so that was just something else. And the last one I'm going to talk about is I was in Yemen, and I was touring. I was in Aden. We were about ready to go to Taiz, which is now in civil conflict, just like Aden is. And this Yemeni major came up and asked me, he said, "So what do you think about the Yemeni educational system?" Because we'd been touring schools, because I was with the civil affairs group. And I said, and I'd seen all the computers. They were all covered up. They never used them, but they were there. And they had the circulatory system. They had the world chart. And I was like, "This is pretty neat." And I said, "Yemeni education system is you're as good as it can get." But the thing that I remember is that Ibn Khaldun wrote the Muqaddimah. And without that, nobody would understand how to study history. So everybody, even Herodotus, is in debt to Ibn Khaldun. And he's like, I thought he was going to explode. He's about like 5'6", like, whoa. Next day, he came up to me. He says, "What do you think of the Yemeni soldier?" And I said, The Yemeni soldier is very brave because the example of the Yemeni soldier goes all the way back to the Battle of Yarmouk at 636 AD. And I said, for 2 days, Yemeni infantry stood and held off the Byzantine, the Roman army, so that the northern Arabs could get their poop in one bag and finally do the attack and win the battle. If it hadn't been for Yemeni infantry, there would be no Islam today. This guy looked at me after that and said, you know who we are, you can go anywhere you want, we will not accompany you, you can even talk to women by yourself because you have honor. And I used that ruthlessly. Okay? Culture is important. Thank you very much.
Mike?
So my name is Mike Purcell, and based on my background as a retired lieutenant colonel, and Vern would know this, but the Marines to my right wouldn't. Field grade officers get lobotomies if you haven't checked the Department of Defense instruction on that. So we're fascinated by things like regulations, orders, organizational management and change, which can be really boring, but in this context it's pretty interesting. Probably nobody here needs to be convinced of the value of sort of culture and language in any endeavor really, but particularly in military operations. But I'll tell one quick story. I'm a tank officer and I was a foreign area officer, which means I had the opportunity to spend a year abroad, in my case in Moscow, largely doing what I needed to do in terms of learning the culture, language, and make connections. So I'm pointing sort of the young guys back there to give them some incentive to sort of learn language, which is a significant investment professionally, to take time away from whatever else you might be doing to earn your sort of reputation in the military as a tank officer, as an infantry officer, as a surface warfare officer, whatever it is. It's a deliberate decision you must make, and if you're going to do it right, it's going to take some focus away from other things you're doing. So some of the payback. In my instance, I spent most of my time in the former Soviet space, so I'll just pick a quick story from there. We're with the Ukrainians, Ukrainian Marines, and their sort of Department of the Navy, and we were doing some joint planning. It was whole of governments, the State Department was there, USAID was there, so on and so forth. And I speak Russian, and all the Ukrainian officers spoke Russian. So at some point, we had interpreters that were going from Russian to English to Ukrainian. I spoke Russian to my counterparts across the table for 30, 40 seconds, and I could feel a very agitated individual down the table from the State Department, angry that I was speaking Russian. And he finally blew up and said, "Would you speak English? Why can't you speak English?" I said, "I can speak English, but you've got an interpreter right here." I was mad. So I killed two birds with one stone there. One, I then gained the loyalty of my Ukrainian colleagues there, sort of forever for the rest of that tour. I was sort of their favorite guy and able to achieve things with them that I wouldn't have otherwise. And more importantly, secondly, being in this town, I got to yell at a State Department guy in public and get away with it, and that was really fantastic. So in any case, I don't need to convince you that. What I'm going to do, though, is talk a little bit about institutional change and the challenges that we as the Department of Defense, but let's talk the Marine Corps, what I know, how hard it's been, how successful we've been, and what we've had to do in order to bring in the leadership and the institution to focus on doing this stuff in perpetuity, not just because we are reacting to some sort of emergent requirement. And then retaining people that are interested in this stuff and good at it and feel rewarded for it. So we use well, quickly the Marine Corps sort of history, and maybe some of you know this, but we've always been expeditionary. We pride ourselves on being expeditionary. There's one interesting thing about that, and it's not that it requires certain airplanes or equipment. Expeditionary operations, from an American perspective, generally don't happen in North America, or at least the United States. So what does that mean? It means you're probably going to encounter what, from our perspective, is a foreign population. This is something that, for some reason, over the years, we tend to sort of not admit to ourselves because we want to go back to these sort of material solutions to problems. It's the American way of war, right? Let's get a better fighter jet. Let's get, whatever. And, sort of in this town, we can admit to ourselves that who in the electorate is pushing us to focus adequately on culture, language, and regional expertise. Who's the constituency that's concerned about building that stuff in their hometown? So there's the only guy that sort of asks questions. We put testimony forward in Congressman Services is the gentleman from Monterey, congressman, because DLI is out, Defense Language Institute is out there, so he does have an interest in it. I think he also cares, honestly about it as a legislator. But in any case, you can see the deck is somewhat stacked against us, those of us that think this stuff is important and want to be good at it. So how do you affect change then? Well, there's two ways to affect change in an institution. One is sort of top down and one is bottom up. From the perspective of, I would say from either direction in the Marine Corps, we have a proud history of being expeditionary and being pretty good at interacting with foreign populations. If you sort of investigate our history a little bit, there's a book that became relatively well known, I think outside the Marine Corps as well, called the Small Wars Manual. And that came out of the Marine Corps' presence in the Caribbean. It's fascinating from an academic perspective. I would suggest that you might enjoy reading it. If you look in there, there's many references to the essential nature of culture and language and understanding that and working with foreign forces to achieve a military mission from the Marine Corps' perspective. Somehow we didn't really take that to heart. So as we move forward through Korea, Vietnam, and then sort of the latter part of the Cold War, there's institutionally continued resistance against sort of establishing this requirement for the conventional forces, not just for sort of linguists who are specially trained to do this kind of thing, but in conventional military units. Another brief vignette is and by the time we go through sort of post-Vietnam, we sort of push back against this type of stuff and we focus more on equipment, and we want to fight the Soviets in the Fulda Gap with tanks and aircraft and sort of forget about this stuff. Well, it reared its ugly head, right? In my personal experience, in an entire tank battalion and Operation Iraqi Freedom from the very beginning during the invasion, we had one interpreter for over 1,000 Marines. And then institutionally, we happened to have a reserve Marine who was born in Baghdad, came to us as a supply Marine, not been identified. His ability to speak Arabic hadn't been identified, hadn't been cataloged. But what did Major Purcell at the time do? I didn't tell anybody, because if I told somebody, he was going to go away. So I kept him, and I put him in my battalion commander's tank and turned him into a tank loader. My battalion commander had a road guide, a guy that could get up in the tank and help me find my way around Baghdad as we sort of moved in there. That's a selfish sort of need that I had. But so two things going on now. We've sort of been forced to admit that it's important. I think institutionally we've taken some of these lessons learned that we've had from the past and finally done some things that I think will stick. We've also made progress in respect to sort of finding, encouraging, developing, incentivizing, rewarding the pursuit of these types of skills to keep the right people in and ensure that they have career opportunities that are sort of commensurate with their skill set. The fact that we're even here talking is probably in some sense is I think probably somewhat of evidence that that's the case. So across the way we look at things, we measure our success. We look at doctrine. If you look at our doctrine now as compared to 15 years ago, it is, and thanks to some of the people here, there are mentions of how important this stuff is. And doctrine for us is sort of, it's like quoting the Bible, in our little world. It made it into doctrine, so everybody sort of had a crack at it. Everybody's had an opportunity to argue about it. People have agendas and opinions and whatever, but there it is. It's got a green cover on it. It's got a number. Everybody can look at it outside of our organization as well. And on that front, it's significantly better, much more sophisticated, has the input of sort of the social science perspective, the international relations perspective, cultural anthropology, and I think it's pretty impressive if you take a look at it. Organizationally, we have organizations now, to include the organization that some of these folks work at, that seemingly are going to be around until somebody works really hard to get rid of them. The attitude organizationally coming out of the conflict is that if there's a drawdown, what do? Do we keep the new stuff we made? Or will we keep the stuff that we had going in, right? We got big, so we're getting smaller. What goes away? Well, the stuff naturally that we built in the last 15 years. Does that make any sense? I would argue not, because those things grew out of requirements that we identified during that period. So we kind of fight a fight within ourselves about that. And I would say that those that advocate for the importance of this stuff have largely won. Some other issues, and I'll just go back to personnel because it's I think an essential point, particularly for a crowd that's probably heavily academic. We've found ways through our personnel system to, again, reward those folks that pursue this stuff, and that's not easy. That means that promotion boards need to be told specifically by the Secretary of the Navy, in our case, that you assembled masses, most of whom don't speak, have no exposure to foreign languages, must understand that capability, must understand what's required to build it, and must understand the price that it comes at. So this person may not have the same number of operational tours as some of his peers. You will respect that, you will value it, and you will understand that our organization benefits from that. And those, I've been involved in those rooms, they're closed doors, they're off the record, so to speak, and it gets pretty, can get pretty vicious. But I've seen over a number of years participating in these things, a sea change And when they know that I have sort of expertise in that respect, I'm consulted, they ask my opinion, do we need these kind of people? And it's a very different environment than it was a few years ago. So to sort of wrap up, I just want to lead you with a sense of optimism that we as a country have sort of, progressed amidst our various mistakes. And I think we probably have a sustainable situation now where people like this will continue to have influence within the organization, and maybe some of those mistakes will be less grievous in the future. So that's it for me.
Thanks, Mike. Will?
Good afternoon. My name is William Caban, and I work for the Marine Corps University as a cultural and linguistic analyst. I teach language to Marines going downrange to execute a various range of mission sets, from humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, security cooperation, foreign internal defense. And what these gentlemen are talking about is exactly right. Language is a big deal. Does everyone that goes to this class, and for those in here, it's important to pick something up. I'm not talking you to go and find some niche little language somewhere that's spoken by a single tribe or something, but talking to the advantage of learning a nation's unifying language. Okay, something that's dominant, that most of the government documentation of these countries are actually using and publishing for official documentation purposes. Why? Because some way, shape, or form, these populations throughout the world will have to learn, if they're going to be incorporated into these government systems, will have to learn this unifying language. That being said, those in the military that will be interoperating with these partner nations, right? If they're in the military, 9 times out of 10, they're going to have to understand this language in order to be able to join. Does this happen all the time? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I've been in instances where I'm running live rifle ranges with live ammunition, and I'm calling commands after a week of training, and people are continuing to move forward while we're shooting and we're calling halt. Okay? So just because you learn the language, keep in mind that it doesn't necessarily always hold true, and that they're always going to be able to understand what you're saying. Okay? That happened in more than one country and more than one region. A little bit more about myself. I've conducted security cooperation throughout the Trans-Sahel region in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as in and throughout Latin America. Okay, teaching various military topics in Spanish and French, and as well as English. But continuing on the same vein of language considerations, is that understand your population, okay, as a military person. We have to understand who it is we're going to train, as well as essentially when Dr. Slater was talking about the social challenges within their own communities and us working with them. What do I mean by this? So an example of this is I was going to go train a couple of military officers in Rwanda. So I had gone and studied most of my course material work in French, okay, thinking, hey, I'm going to be going over there to speak some French. I got there, day one, this was 2008. They said, yeah, okay, we're going to put on pause. Can you just switch to English, because as of this week, we actually just changed our unifying language to English, so let's move forward on this. I said, all right, fantastic. Thank you. Let me just change slide decks real quick. Change my slide deck, and here we are in English moving forward. Continuing along the line, another significant purpose for security cooperation is not only to train or familiarize host nation counterparts with various skill sets that they can use for a range of military operations, such as humanitarian assistance or even counterinsurgency operations, but is not only to familiarize them with these tactics and techniques, but also to build rapport with these individuals. Okay, so that's something that I teach over here at the Marine Corps Culture Center. But an experience of this continuing on is, once the same Rwandan officers found out that I was from New York, they're like, so how come you don't talk like Joey from Friends? And I said, that's a good question, because if I do, then people don't take me as seriously. And then, if I slip from non-regional diction to my New York accent, say, yo, what's going on, guys? What's going on over there? But they wanted to hear that. So during the class, I would have to speak like this and then switch to my New York accent when it was tea time, okay? And that's what it was. But these are subtle nuances that, as a military trainer advisor, it's important for us to translate these ideas and concepts to those who are going to be training others, all right? Language is a big deal. We keep hitting that point on the head, but as Mike Purcell said, sometimes it doesn't translate always to our military professional record, as well as going into our promotion boards. Continuing on with the social challenges of working with partner nations, and Vern said this earlier, they know us, they're very familiar with us. They are more in tune with our history than we are of theirs. Why? Because our history is essentially it impacts the world a lot of times, okay? More so than theirs. Insurrections in certain regions, while provocative, don't necessarily have international ramifications, all right? That being said, when they know our history, they also study our military. And when they study our military, they also study the different branches and the variation between them. So they understand the varying dynamics of what our DoD brings. For example, in the Marine Corps, like Mike said, you're an expeditionary force, land, air, and sea. We're known for that, okay? Not only are we known for that, we're known for being a little bit more rough and tumble, a little bit more tactically proficient, if you will, and as Vern said earlier, speaking in cursive. Okay, that is something that happens. And foreign militaries actually expect this of us and almost welcome it, and they're actually, quite frankly, disappointed if we don't live up to this standard. Okay, I've been to more than one country where I'm acting like a nice guy and talking to these guys in a professional manner, and they're like, "Why is your uniform so pressed and you're being so nice to us?" And I was like, "All right, we can flip that switch if you like." But again, in an international situation, you don't know the varying dynamic of the individuals you're going to be working with. And that's something that, I'd rather teeter and talk to my Marines and tell the Marines specifically to teeter on the side of err on the side of caution than to go out there and just live your life the way you do. Because you can get the wrong person who will take something in the wrong way. And the media, as Vern stated earlier, and Dr. Slater, will be right there to pick it up. Not only will they be right there to pick it up, they're very quick to spin what you're doing into the exact opposite direction. Okay, for example, we're teaching patrolling operations for a unit that's going to be working with the United Nations in sub-Saharan Africa. So we're teaching patrolling, et cetera, and someone with a camera phone takes a picture of me practicing patrolling with a group in northern Uganda somewhere. Within a week, there's an article talking about how United States Marines are conducting operations in Uganda and nobody knows about it, and they're there killing babies and burning villages. Absolutely not the case. Actually, didn't even have a weapon in the photo, so maybe, okay, sure, I didn't do it. But the picture was of one of the guys that I was working with, and I was in the background somewhere. Either way, it's important for us to train our guys not only in the culture of the people, but the culture of the media, and understand that you need to be very, very careful when operating different areas, okay? Especially areas where there has been conflict in the past, there's currently conflict taking place, or there's a poor history of conflict on relations with the United States military, okay? But going on to the same, talking again about them being aware, partner nations being aware of the varying dynamics of within military culture, because they understand who the Marines are, oftentimes in the Marine Corps, or in the DoD, we promote joint operations, all right? Interoperability within the forces. Okay, I have been a part of many joint staff and worked with various branches of service, Army, Air Force, even up to the Coast Guard, okay? Even governmental agencies, DEA, et cetera, et cetera. That being said, when they send us and we go to different countries, sometimes when we deploy with them, they don't want to deal with other branches of service because they know and they understand the hierarchy within the DoD. Not that there is a hierarchy that these people are higher than the other, this branch is higher than the other, but again, the reputation of Marines precedes them. Okay, so as an example of this, I, as an enlisted member of the staff and CEO community, was teaching in a country, and I was sent to go instruct with a female captain of the Air Force. A female captain of the Air Force who spoke with a very, very heavy Southern twang with blonde hair and blue eyes. And here we are in sub-Saharan Africa, okay? And within the first class, she gave her introduction, and it was lights out. The class was not paying attention at all. Okay, so and I'm over here thinking, well, I don't understand what's going on. She's a captain. They're supposed to be listening to her because everybody in the room is at least the rank of captain and maybe 2 majors. I stand up in the front, and everybody's awake. They're taking notes, and all I've done is introduce myself. What was the situation there? Well, number one, she was a woman. I was a man. We need to understand the realities of this dynamic. As much as we sit here and all people are born and created equal, fantastic, that works in the Western realm, that works in academia of the United States sometimes or other, but it does not work when working with other partner nation militaries. They essentially put women in their military so that they can appease Western nations, so that they can get more money, so that they can essentially train and somebody can funnel that money into their pocket. That's what's going on. We can sit here, we can pretend like that's not happening, but it is. I'm telling you because I've been there more than 10 countries and I've seen it every single time. Okay, I've spoken with many members of the military, and this is what's happening. There's a significant discontent between gender relations in foreign militaries, more so than one would consider here in the United States. Okay, here we have a lady here, she's getting ready to go in, and you know what? She's still sitting at the table with these guys, and they're having a great time. But you know what? That would not happen in a foreign, it's more specifically in a sub-Saharan military setting. Okay, they would sit with her, but there would be more space. She'd probably be at that table, not this table, and they would just not be happy. Unless there were some Western people in the room, they'd be like, oh yeah, she's here, and we are having a good time. And then as soon as she leaves, and 3 days deep, and 3 days into the training, and 2 beers deep into conversation afterwards, they're very expressing their discontent with the situation. Okay, and these are the realities that we must face. So getting back to it, once I introduced myself and we saw the dynamic of what was going on, the course material that was heavier in weight and what we felt was more significant had to be shifted to my hands. And this was a big deal because consider this. In other militaries, unlike in the United States military, where delegation of authority and responsibilities to the staff NCO and NCO community is rather well received and done by almost every single branch. Actually, all branches of military do this. Over there, not so much. Leadership is essentially oligarchical, stovepiped, and the only people that can give any orders or take any or responsible for anything are the officer community. Here we have, in multiple occasions where I was teaching as a member of the NCO, staff NCO community, an enlisted member of the United States military training officers of the at least company grade and field grade level, and everyone's taking notes, having a great time. Now I understand it has to do a lot, there's also things you have to consider like personality. Somebody being able to deliver a message to people effectively, communicate these thoughts, and make eye contact with people. But on the same token, understand that I have been sent to more than one country, and we are pushing essentially some kind of understanding that, hey, military, the women do participate in our military, so I've been sent with female officers on more than one occasion to more than one country, and the reaction has essentially been the same. But we still push forward on it, and we change our dynamic, we change our essentially our plan in order to accommodate this reality. Okay? Yes, sir. All right, no problem. That's it for me.
All right, good afternoon. My name is John Powell. Unlike the rest of the people at this table, I'm actually no longer at LtCol. I'm now a student, but I did have the great opportunity to work with all of them for pretty much the past year teaching culture on the West Coast. Prior to that, I was in the Marine Corps as an infantry officer for about 5 years. During that time, I went to Afghanistan twice. And so I had a unique perspective in that I was able to experience some of the challenges of some of the cultural challenges in operating, training, partnering, and mentoring with the Afghan military units. And then I was able to learn why those challenges were there. And so now I'm left, in hindsight, kind of applying some of the cultural knowledge that LtCol teaches to my previous experiences. So my goal right now is to use a series of vignettes to kind of tease out some of the cultural difficulties in Afghanistan and trace them back to some of the misperceptions among American military, despite a lot of the effort that the rest of the people at this table and myself put into training these units. The reality persists that the average American military member going overseas does not have the requisite cultural knowledge to operate effectively over there. So the first story that I'd like to talk about takes place in 2013 in the district of Nowzad, Afghanistan, which is in Helmand province, which about 2 months ago was formerly overrun by the Taliban, so that was uplifting. However, in the story, there's two major personalities. One is the Nowzad district chief of police, who I won't name, but he was widely known throughout the province to have ties to some high-level Taliban commanders in the district. But on the other hand, he was a distant relation of then President Hamid Karzai, which is how he got his position. So there was kind of an awkward antagonism between him and the rest of the US military, especially the police advisor team who was charged with advising him. And then we have his second in command, who I'll call Michael Jackson. He was very westernized. He spoke fluent English, he dressed very well, and he was very friendly. Unlike the chief of police, he cooperated with the advisors, and he was generally seen as a trusted agent within the US military for the district. So one night in midsummer 2013, the American side of the Capt in Nowzad was awakened by a loud explosion. We ran over to the police side where the explosion came from, and we discovered Michael Jackson missing his hands and the chief of police yelling at him, not treating him at all. So we obviously took Michael Jackson over to the American side, treated him and evacuated him. And then we started to investigate what had actually happened. So the chief of police's story was that Michael Jackson was a Taliban operative who had basically hidden an IED inside of a police radio. And when he had tried to get the chief of police to turn it on, the chief outsmarted him apparently and told him to turn it on himself. And that's how he ended up as he did. Absolutely. So this obviously surprised us because we did not think Michael Jackson was a Taliban operative. None of the personality traits that we had observed in him, none of his actions would have suggested that. However, due to the position of the chief of police and without any further knowledge, the official report that went up was that the Taliban had tried to attack the chief of police in Nowzad. Now what this did is it essentially removed a lot of the doubt as to the chief of police's status. Okay? It kind of overshadowed the fact that he certainly had ties to high-level Taliban commanders, and it cemented his place as chief in the district. Unfortunately, we kept investigating, and about 3 weeks later we found out the truth, which is that Michael Jackson's cousin had been attacked and killed in a distant province by a relation of the chief of police, and that this was a revenge-motivated attack based on kinship ties. We sent that information up, but unfortunately, it never had the chance to surface to the level of publicity that the original report had concerning the chief of police. So the end result of this is that kind of our over-reliance and overestimating the motivation of the chief of police based on his role and underestimating the family, clan, and tribal values that were really at play here led to a significant misunderstanding at a higher level and essentially left the chief of police in power. So that's one example. The next one is tied in a similar way to an oversimplification in our minds as far as what was actually happening within the Afghan military. So I was blessed in a way in my position. I was able to roam around the battlefield a lot, and I was able to interact with several different units. The ones I want to talk about are the Afghan National Army, the ANA, and the Afghan Uniformed Police, or the AUP. So our conception and the essential battle plan for the US military, at least in Helmand Province, was that the Afghan National Army's role was to conduct assaults and then secure kind of the outlying areas around urban centers. And then the Afghan Uniformed Police were to do the daily policing work within the urban centers or within villages and have more daily interaction with the local Helmand people. Now, this was based on an understanding that the ANA are formed mostly from northern militia. They are less ethnically related to the Pashtuns just by percentage than the AUP, who are mostly locally recruited. And so the assumption was that the AUP, being Pashtuns, would be more able to relate to the locals in that area and would be more effective, and that the ANA would be seen as kind of a rapacious foreign invader. Now, the reality on the ground, unfortunately, was about the opposite. I had a chance to talk to lots of locals, and their almost universal opinion was that the ANA were much better trained and much more trustworthy than the AUP, despite the lack of ethnic solidarity. So, and actually, Catherine Norman, who's a researcher with the Marine Corps Field Evaluation Group, was able to do some research in 2012 that revealed the exact same opinion across Helmand Province, which is that the professionalism of the ANA far outweighed the ethnic background of the AUP in forming the opinions of the local Afghan people. So essentially what we have here is another misrepresentation, and it continued. There was obviously no change to that strategy. And I think to at least a certain extent, I mean, we can probably say that the experiment in Helmand Province is largely a failure at this point on the Afghan military, at least every single district that I went to has now been formally overrun by the Taliban. So I think at some point you can probably link that strategy to the eventual failure of the Afghan military to really maintain its position in Helmand province. And then the last story is actually tied to the role of Islam in Helmand. So in 2011, through a strange confluence of events, I was able to operate with a special operations team that was kind of babysitting another special operations unit from the United Arab Emirates. Why they were there was never really clear to me. They had a lot of really good equipment, but they were generally not allowed outside the wire very often. So the special operations team was kind of scratching their heads and trying to figure out a way to actually utilize the UAE commandos. And what they came up with was a suggestion from the UAE officers, was that because they were Muslim and because the people of Helmand were Muslim, that they had a good role to play in telling the Afghans how to be Muslim. And that kind of superiority in their theology would somehow allow them to interact in a better way with the villagers where we were than we were able to. And this was a very violent area. We had almost no cooperation from local villagers. So obviously that didn't go over very well. Again, I was able to interview a number of the villagers, and they, to a man, resented the UAE and were very, compared to the UAE, they appreciated that the Brits and the Americans never deigned to actually, criticize their religion. And again, I think you can go back to a comparison with the Taliban, where part of the reason they were initially successful, in my opinion, is that they were able to link their version of Islam to the village Islam of Helmand, which is very different from mainstream Islam. So it's obviously that changed over time after the Taliban were kind of solidified their position, but in the early stage of them actually sweeping through Helmand, what made them successful in comparison with, say, the Hizb-ut-Tahrir of Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who it seems really pushed his kind of a more mainstream Arab Islam on people, was that the Taliban were able to relate with the local villagers. So again, if you take that simple historical example and apply it to 2011, it's obvious, or it should be obvious, that allowing the UAE to do this would not work out. But again, it's another example of a pretty simple cultural misperception that was so widespread that nobody, admittedly myself either, really questioned it at the time. But looking back, it seems very, very obvious that this was a terrible idea. So again, hopefully with those three stories, I'm able to kind of tease out some of the issues. The real point is that learning culture and applying culture is very difficult. And the work that these guys do at this table is hugely important to that. And I think going forward, any policymaker considering a counterinsurgency campaign of any type has to consider the role of culture. You cannot start pulling levers on the local society, on the political structure, or on the religious structure without truly understanding what the effects of pulling those levers will be. So, thanks.
Thank you, John. We have a late arrival. One of our panel members was fighting Washington traffic, got here a few minutes late. This is Mr. Mark Beaudreu.
Good evening, thank you for having me. And I will say that because I'm at the podium, I'm no more important than anyone at this table, so don't be under any illusion. Also, they stole everything I was going to say, so now I'm making this up as I go. I am a active duty field grade officer in one of the armed services. I'm not officially representing the armed service today, so I don't feel compelled to tell you which one it is. I will say that there's a few of us, and we're very proud, and I'll just kind of leave you with that. I've been involved in training, service level training, most of the meathead stuff, the majority of my life, butt stroking and head butting and shooting and things like that. That's traditional going back that the military is good at for the last 2,000 years. And as we've gone into the 20th and 21st century, obviously, turning into hybrid warfare is really being the target for our future. It's really a future training objective. It's also an environment and everything. it involves a lot of traditional warfare stuff that we're good at, some irregular warfare stuff that we're occasionally good at, and then now we're in the information age, we're throwing in a whole bunch of things like counterterrorism and criminal networks and things like that. So hybrid warfare is the name of the game. We like to say we're on top of it, don't worry, keep paying your taxes, we got this, but it's more difficult than we, it's hard habits to break going back a couple hundred years. And why is that? I think it's going to require a paradigm shift. Taking a page out of Mike's book here is institutionally, in the acquisitions process, for example, we tend towards material solutions, that's obvious. And there's all kinds of political reasons and all kinds of capitalist and democratic reasons why we do that, and that's a good thing. And then when we talk about training, people say, does the military do training? Yeah, we do training all the time, but sitting around with some of my colleagues, we started looking at our training. We train on the material solutions. So I get you buy me a new fighter, thank you. It only costs the taxpayers $35 million. I'll spend 2.5 years learning how to fly it. So the training and education isn't always in things like the social sciences, but rather on the material itself. And so we are a well-trained military, but I might argue that maybe we're well-trained in the materials we use for war, not only in the operation of the material, but also in the employment of the material. So, so it takes a training shift. The thing is aside from any, like I said, capitalist stuff, when I buy a tank, it'll be in the inventory for 20 years, and many people will drive it. If I want to teach somebody a language, teach somebody how to be cross-culturally competent, or teach somebody about a region, at least in the Marine Corps, there's a 3 in 4 chance that I will lose that person he or she won't be a careerist, is what we call it. So 1 in 4 chance I won't return them into society 4 years later. So if you think about the business model, and this is IBM or Ford or something, and I know that I'm putting hundreds of thousands of dollars of training and education into someone who's going to go work for somebody else in 3 years, it's not a good business model. So I think that's one of the paradigms that we have to shift, and I have some ideas how to do that. One of the purposes of the military is not just to defend our borders, but also it's a way to get out of poverty, and a way to get from one class to the other potentially, get your education, and return some of these people back to society better than what they came in. At least that's what we say in the Marine Corps. I hope the Army does the same thing. So when we're investing in people, we're actually investing in citizens, right? And it would be a good thing if we started seeing things like that, and not just investing in a material solution. And also, the other big problem we have is, along with this sort of, I need 20 tanks to conduct this war, so I'm going to build these 20 tanks, we also have a personnel management problem, which I need a tank crew of 4, and then when this guy rotates out, I just put another person in. It's very much like an industrial revolution. I grew up in Detroit, so I think of the auto worker. This guy's sick, we'll just put another guy in to pop rivets in. But what we're seeing today with IT, and certainly the advent of complex, even military hardware and technology, it takes a lot more skill to navigate the operational environment. So I would argue that instead of doing personnel management where you're just replacing one factory worker with the other, that we somehow are able to track some of these people as for talent management. Because the person who speaks Arabic probably shouldn't be assigned to South America, or maybe he or she should, but that should be a good reason. Unfortunately, all of these Marines here have been designated by a 4-digit number, and on paper we could be the same. I'm a 0302 infantryman, or I'm a 7502 backseater in a jet. It's as if You know, I'm just like a cookie cutter of somebody else, but I can bring a lot more to the table than that. So there's, I think, some old, as we move forward with kind of teaching the Marine Corps or any other service and how to get some of these, what I would call irregular skills, which is kind of silly because they're seemingly more regular than ever in terms of usage, then we'd have to probably look at our personnel and our acquisitions process and what we really want to do. So I'm going to have to tell a war story here, so I'll make it quick. I think you've heard how LREC, so we call Language, Regional Expertise, and Culture, LREC, got to make it into an acronym, right? Can be an enabler to operations, right? It's the grease that can really make your wheels go if you have that interpreter, like Mike was saying, the one that he hoarded and kept in his, strapped to his tank or whatever he did. But the LREC, or lack of it, a lack of cultural knowledge, can be an inhibitor. And I'm not talking about anything that's a disaster, like it's obvious to say like a negotiation where someone makes an incorrect translation and then there's something lost in the translation and then the bridge doesn't get built. I'm not talking about that. I was in Fallujah in Al-Anbar province in 2005. It was calm. It was after the big battle, and it was normal for us to go kind of door to door, and we were assigned sectors, and it was normal to collect, what is now biometric data, but what was then is more or less census data. And at relative random, you would say, hey, we're going to go on a 3-hour patrol. Let's stop at 3 houses. Stopped at a house, knocked on the door, no one was home, heard stuff inside. Whatever the probable cause was, we went inside. Now, I was on the outside cordon, so not the inside. So I'll explain that in just a minute. The squad goes in. They see what turns out to be a large cage with a bunch of Persian rugs on top of it. Marines, as they are curious, want to see what kind of dog or elephant or what kind of pet this guy has. Opens the door, and it's a human being. It's caged inside of there. And relative comfort, but the idea for us, there's a human being in a cage. So now we're thinking human rights violation and that kind of thing. So what do? We go talk to the neighbors, find out where this person lives or where this person works, send the neighbors to go do this, call it in. Now, instead of a patrol that may have taken 3 hours with a couple of stops, now it's kind of a big deal. Now we have to worry about security, so we set internal security to the building. We call it a quick reaction force, which I was a part of, set an outside cordon. So now you have a defense in depth. I happened to be the one that would call for the aircraft, so wanted to have a couple of aircraft in the sky to watch us while we resolve this issue. So I'll fast forward. We were there for a while. Well, being there for a while is not only intrusive, but it also makes us a target. Now you want to kind of stay on the move. So what threw off the patrol schedule, also potentially endangering other people. Got the guy from the bread factory or whatever, he comes back in and he, through an interpreter, finally explains, this is my brother, he's mentally ill, my wife has died, there's no one to take care of him. If I don't put him in a cage or lock him in a room, he will hurt himself. And it was perfectly humane, because certainly we've heard, and I have traveled to places where someone with a disability like that would not even make it. Would be too much of a liability for the family. So we just said, oh, that's messed up, blah, 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 okay, whatever, and we kind of went away. But it was years later, as I became a foreign area officer and started studying culture, I look back at that and say, had we known that going in, it wouldn't have been such a shock, and it might have been a speed bump, but it wouldn't have been a halt, and it wouldn't have taken twice as many Marines and all that other stuff. So something very simple could disrupt what was otherwise a normal operation. So that's basically it for me in my war story. It's not as funny. I've got other ones, but I promised I wasn't allowed to tell them. So I would say that the other challenge is one of the things about OIF and OEF, we were able to kind of get good at making the sausage, because the Marine Corps knew we were going where we were going, so it was either Dari, Pashto, you know, or Iraqi Arabic, for example. But now we're back to regular operations in the world, and all over the Middle East and Africa now, specifically for this group, and it's hard to guess what we'll need next. So we have some training and education programs. We're signing career Marines languages and regions to study in the hopes that no matter where a unit deploys, there's some kind of resident knowledge inside, at least know what questions to ask, if not, you know, having a person there.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody.